Welcome everyone, bonjour. My name is Marco Cordova. Welcome to our Lights Camera America panel. This is the second of our panel series. We first had our first panel during the Sundance Film Festival. It's great to be here during the Cannes Film Festival. I also want to thank our partners, Film USA, especially Katie Pryor, and also the other co-founder, Tony Armour, who's also with Film USA. For those of you not familiar with Monarch, we're based in Atlanta, Georgia. We are also specializing in film, renewable energy, historic preservation, and affordable housing tax credits. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about those services. And I want to thank everyone here for joining us, especially the wonderful panel. Thank you. First and foremost, I want to introduce, I was going to have an order in here, but I'll go out of order. Valerie, she's actually a good friend of mine. I've known for several years. The first time I met Valerie, she was working still at Netflix, and she told me one day that she was going to this up-and-coming independent production company that I never heard of. And now everyone knows A24, so thank you, Val. And I have a question for each panelist. Introductory question. What do you think the current state of U.S. filmmaking is right now, in light of everything going on, tariffs and otherwise? No pressure.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. You're really starting strong. I really have a hard time having the point of view of the global filmmakers about U.S. production. But at least for us, we always have U.S. production going on, and so. Is this working better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. In fact, I would say we always have a majority of a production taking place in the U.S.
Okay. Thank you. And then next up, I have here Tony Armour. He's the COO also of Talent Entertainment. Aside from being the co-founder of Film USA, I believe you are also the former film commissioner for Dallas, if I'm not mistaken. So welcome, Tony. And from your perspective, what do you think is the current state of U.S. filmmaking right now?
I mean, okay, so this mic's working a little better now. I mean, as everybody knows, so much business has been lost overseas, and it's really a depressed market in the U.S., and it depends if you're talking about U.S. filmmaking from an independent perspective, for like the indie filmmakers, or from a larger, more studio perspective. And I think the indie filmmakers are flourishing a little bit, especially those that are working in kind of the micro budget spaces and horror films that are the Terrifiers and Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, that kind of thing, that maybe people think of as only just little one-trick ponies. But at the same time, to a certain extent, those are propping up the film industry with these little indies that are really being innovative and doing some different things, as opposed to what are the studios doing and the larger business models of moving projects overseas. And so it's I think it depends on what level you're talking about it, but it's it can be up, it can be down, depending on who you're talking about.
Great. Next up, I have my friend Tom Ara. In the legal community, he's high up there. I think every year since I've known him, he's been named one of the top lawyers from Variety or Hollywood Reporter. I'm thankful you're here to join us. Tom, you have a lot of international experience as well. What do you think is the current state of U.S. filmmaking in light of, the recent tariffs and other developments coming up?
Thanks, Marco. Well, there aren't tariffs yet, right? And I don't produce movies, as you said. I work in the legal side, but my clients who finance and produce movies, I think, would probably use the word uncertain most regularly. And unfortunately, uncertainty is not a good thing for financiers, because financiers like certainty. And I would like to find us in a place where we have a little more certainty.
Next up, I have Mike Masalam. He is also a filmmaker, and now he's the COO of Shadowbox Studios, based in Atlanta, Georgia. Mike, what's your current perspective of U.S. filmmaking? I know a lot of sound stages and studios the past couple years in Atlanta, they've called me and you know, they're pretty much been empty for the past couple years. What's your perspective and take?
Thank you. Thanks for having me too. I guess what I would say is what has always been true, whether I'm in my current capacity or in previous roles, I've overseen studio strategy arms for both Apple TV and Netflix, and then prior to that was a film commissioner in the state of Michigan when the film incentive was actually quite robust and has now since gone away. But what has always been true is that the three components, the triangulation of any successful ecosystem has been infrastructure, incentive, and crew base. And I think at the end of the day, today is a moment in time. Tomorrow will be a different one. I don't think we should make long-term decisions based on short-term problems, and let's just all pray that the moment that we're in today is a short-term problem. But if we hold steadfast to what makes sense for our industry and what makes and has made our industry engines rev for as long as they have, and are confident in those three areas, we will find our way out of the tunnel.
Next up, I have Jaha Cummings. Jaha is the publisher for Blue Ocean Press. He also is one of the main people involved with Shoot the Book in Cannes. Jaha, what's your perspective of U.S. filmmaking, and is there anything that you could tell us more about what you do?
Well, I'm a now U.S. publisher, began as a Japanese publisher, been involved in the European film market in basically creating IP for producers and directors to be able to adapt into movies, and been involved in the Frankfurt Book Fair for many years, then Venice when they opened it up to national publishers 2017, and then from Cannes from 2 years ago when they opened it up to non-French publishers. And so what we do is we bring stories to the European film market in hopes of being able to have this adapted into film, documentary, TV, etc. I would say when it comes to this, the presence of Film USA here is a big deal. I say the US has been largely absent from the European film market, and I think that the presence of Film USA actually changes this dynamic greatly. So just really happy, one, to see that. Two, I think with us not having a federal film office, there's a perception sometimes amongst, let's say in the international market that you can't do co-productions with Americans, and so therefore, even though you can do with states and cities, having a federal film office really would change the dynamic. I think it would really increase the number of productions locally, and so I really applaud the efforts that Film USA is doing right now to help make this reality.
I can say you covered all my talking points. Thank you for that.
The next question I have, for the two former film commissioners here, Tony and Mike, what can you see that the U.S. can emulate from other countries in developing a U.S. Film incentive program, hopefully in the future?
Okay. I mean, if you're talking about from a national perspective, just having one, that's the big thing. Structure-wise, there's so many different structures that I don't think the structure even necessarily matters. It's really right now just the fact that that it's in the national conversation and in the international conversation, right? Everybody wants to talk about it. We're talking about it on this panel. I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. Joe, the plumber in Toledo, Ohio, now knows about film incentives and wonders why this is important. And so the fact that people are speaking about this and talking about it and thinking about it is a good thing, no matter the way that the talking came about. And so I think, how do we emulate other countries? Just by having something that makes us more competitive to start with, really.
The only thing I would add to that is, and I think this was somewhat covered in the last panel, but the need for stability. I think the film industry and the entertainment industry in general is committing so many dollars into the market, wherever they may be, at a state or federal level or at an international level. And I think making sure that politicians and the way in which policy is affected is stable, to give people the assurance that they can come, they can film, and they can see the return they're expecting.
I also want to give a shout out to Film USA. You might have learned from recent press, they were part of a letter that was sent to the president promoting certain sections of the code to improve our U.S. incentives and also to enact a federal incentive program. So thank you, Film USA, again, for your support. Going next, Val, going back to you. As in terms of A24 and how you guys decide to shoot projects, one thing I admire about you guys is you guys just don't look at, incentives. You really look into the creative process and the storytelling. And I think, you guys have here a project, Eddington, that was based in New Mexico, and you guys actually shot there in New Mexico, and also the other projects I know you guys are working on, you're also shooting in those locations in the East Coast. Can you tell us more on how you guys decide where to shoot?
Yeah, of course. With Eddington, that was really easy because the story is set in New Mexico. In fact, it shot quite a bit in Truth or Consequence. I think there's an S at the end of this one. But it was so appropriate for the movie, and I'm sure you'll understand when you get to see it. But that one was easy, and that when that happens, then it's like how do we optimize the incentive? Because we know we're going there. Is it via partnership? How we're crewing and all that. So that becomes the goal. Sometimes it could be a few places, and at the end of the day, we really want to empower the filmmaker to make their decision, and we're there to provide guidance on incentive opportunities or concerns. But yeah, we're there to help and make sure that we're there for the filmmakers to also meet their budget target. But the creative will usually decide where we're going.
Any of you guys have been involved with other projects where you guys were just, shooting at a certain location, and you guys finally decided to shoot somewhere else or stay within the U.S. because of incentives? Do you guys have any examples of that?
I'll share something. Last year, we had a title, Moon Rebellion, that actually was selected by the jury at Cannes for adaptation, and we were looking. Our producer is here, and also with that, when we're looking at analyzing things, the incentives that Louisiana offers actually are quite good. And so, in addition to the relationship that France and Louisiana have overall, which I think is a very good pathway for a lot of productions, I think Louisiana itself is something really you have to consider. I mean, with its programs, especially if you're looking at having your screenplay written by Louisianan and you actually film there, and also then maybe possibly going to the rural parishes, you have a pretty strong package, a big, strong financial argument for filming there.
Great. I might add to that we talked a little bit about trying to keep business inside the U.S., but there's a huge component that we're missing, which is, as we're here doing Film USA for 10 days, there's so many European filmmakers that come to us and say, I want to shoot in the U.S. Who do I talk to? Where do I go? How do I do a co-production? And so, like you mentioned, whether it's that federal film office or having people within the state and regional offices that can be a point of contact, that can do those co-ventures rather than co-productions. There's a huge opportunity to draw business from Europe, from the filmmaking community here over to the U.S., and not just having it go the other direction as well.
Going back to you, Tom, you're the legal guy here. Is there any gaps that the U.S. have in terms of from a legal perspective that you see compared to other countries that could improve filmmaking for U.S. producers?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest gap are treaties, right? European nations and even some of the other regions of the world have very helpful treaties for filmmaking partnerships where you're able to work across borders, and I think we lack that. In fact, I think a lot of people look at the U.S. from the outside, as you were saying. Producers come in, want to shoot in the U.S., and they say, well, so what's the law? And I say, well, there are 50 jurisdiction laws. Like, it's not like one law you can just rely on, right? And there are 50 tax incentive programs, maybe not that many, but, you know, so it's a very complex puzzle to figure out. And I think in general, the U.S. needs to look at revamping all of its tax treaties in general with foreign nations. The U.S. has tax treaties with most nations around the world, which deal with things like withholding taxes and taxes on dividends and distributions and royalties. So many of these were done decades ago, and they're just not modernized. And I think modernizing some of those, thinking about the global, nature of the economy, particularly film and television production, would be a good place to start. And in the process of that, incorporating some treaties where you can take advantage of cross-border opportunities, where you have somebody from Europe who wants to shoot a little bit in Europe and shoot a little bit in the US, and they can still qualify for everything that they're qualifying for if they're doing it with another region.
And I heard recently that one of the new film ambassadors, Sylvester Stallone, wants to do a treaty for Italy and the U.S. I'm not sure if a large part of that he's filming there also, but at least it's the right step for us.
I mean, I think he gets the conversation going. I'm not sure. I know the parties involved in that. I'm not sure how viable that is. I mean, obviously, John Voight and his delegation have been talking with the president about different opportunities, particularly around the U.S. tax system, 181, 461, and we can talk more about that. If,
199.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, there are a lot of proposals being thrown out. Are we going to be able to keep his attention on this topic, or is he going to move on to the next thing, which, tends to happen.
Yeah, so everyone just keep writing your letters and talking to your local officials. And going back to you, Mike, I know Shadowbox Studios, you guys have a global footprint, but what other factors you think can help you guys expand to more domestic locations? We talked earlier about, the lack of, people filming in sound stages. But what do you think would be a good way to increase that?
Yeah, thanks. So much of what I've been focusing on since I joined the company in September of last year has been the ways in which both production and production executives operate, and so much of those services exist outside of just the traditional soundstage model. Obviously, we're a company that has a real estate portfolio in major filming areas in the UK, in Atlanta, and in hopefully soon in the Gold Coast of Australia. But outside of that, it's a global team that understands the way in which production operates, start from development and pre-production, and that's offering services that really appeal to production execs, like being able to source studios worldwide, regardless of whether they're in our portfolio, or being able to help in areas that don't have traditional sound stages, but where production will be in retrofitting certain areas, offering opportunity within our Backlot Academy program to help train day one ready crew. So I think it's talking to production execs at a level that says, no matter where you are in the process, we'll be right there so that you don't get the call at 2 a.m. that's going to cost you money, that's going to cost your production time. You leave as much of that money in front of the camera and let us worry about some of the things that, frankly, you don't have time to.
Okay, good. And I know that, Tony, your company, Talent Entertainment, you guys recently purchased some space in Dallas, and that you guys, a lot of that I heard is, a good location, but as far as the new Texas Film Incentive increasing their program, that's still kind of on the table. What are your plans are for talent and expanding in Texas?
Yeah, so we have Southside Studios in Dallas, which is really just off of downtown. It's old warehouse space that has been used as stages for 15 years and done a number of TV series over the years, but it was just old warehouse space. And so part of when I was at the Film Commission, I brought Steve Demler, CEO of Talent to Town, said, I want to show you something while you're here. And I basically put the deal together for him to buy the stages, and then he hired me away from the Film Commission. So now part of my job is make sure the stages are busy. But they're the largest stages in North Texas. And Taylor Sheridan is shooting all of his stuff in Fort Worth and Dallas area. The incentive for Dallas we'll know by the beginning of June, but all indications are for Texas rather that it's going to be 25 to 31% in a cash rebate program. It'll be very competitive. I'm sure everybody's seen the the Woody Harrelson, Matthew McConaughey video that was out there that really made a big difference in swaying opinion towards that, and talking with a lot of large studios and studio companies like Shadowbox and everything. People want to be in business in Texas, and so we're excited about where it's going to be moving from here, basically.
And kind of just going to the different state programs, I think one state in particular that has drawn a lot of attention this year is New York. With more increased incentives, and I know A24 does a lot of business in New York. What do you guys, can you tell me more about the increase and what you foresee for your activities in New York?
We do have a lot of activities in New York, and I think that's why we were also very interested in having some kind of changes when it comes to the monetization timeline. This is very important for a company like us. They've been they've been listening, and we've been talking with them a lot, and it will be interesting to see what the new program will bring. There's a lot to digest still, I think, and really, I'm very intrigued about the indie program personally, but so yeah, it should be interesting.
So we'll see. And I know, Tom, you're from California too, and California also recently announced increased funding, $750 million. What do you foresee that affecting studios filming in California? And do you think that'll move the needle somewhat? I know there's been a lot of productions that have left.
Yeah, I mean, look, hopefully, the lottery system has been a complete wreck in California. It's very challenging, particularly for independent producers, to get any of that tax credit money, and I think the hope is that with the larger credit, the lottery system hopefully gets refined and improved so that independent productions have a better chance of grabbing some of that money as well. Look, I think our industry has a bit of a perception issue, right? I mean, the idea that taxpayer money goes to help Hollywood, which help very wealthy celebrities, producers, directors, is a perception issue. And so it's very challenging for these programs to continue to expand and grow. I think it has to happen at the federal level at some point, because ultimately we have a $15 billion surplus in our industry. We are one of the few American industries that actually has a surplus, not a deficit when it comes to trade. And it's not just the money surplus that's valuable to the United States, it's the soft power that comes from exporting American culture when you're shooting in the US. Whether it's tourism, whether it's democracy, what remains of it, whether it's democracy, whether it's our way of life. I mean, we've seen the value of that in other jurisdictions. You look at the Korean film and entertainment industry and the success they've had because they had government support. Kofik and the government of Korea invented an entire industry because they stood behind it, and they stood it up 25 years ago. And I don't think we need that level of support, but I think we do need the federal level of support to come in to really stand behind the exporting of U.S. filmmaking and culture in a way that I don't think has been thought of in the past. So state incentives, great, continue to grow, but I think there will be taxpayer pushback, and has been. California, even a very liberal democratic state, challenge to that growth. Other states are impossible to win that. I'm surprised that Texas was able to succeed in that regard, because that is a state where again, the perception is not very positive.
When I think that depends on the messaging, right? And that's one of the things that Texas has done well, is change that message to be, hey, this helps rural communities too. Sheridan bought giant ranch out in Weatherford, Texas, and so people in all these small towns that we don't want Hollywood coming to their towns, and you get Taylor Sheridan type content there. He's been a major driver of that incentive, and so it depends on who the messenger is and what the message is, and I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing a state like Texas. You wouldn't typically think of that happening, and they like the idea of like, hey, let's screw Hollywood and take their business too. So I think there's a little bit of that as well. What can they do to kind of do that sort of thing? So if other states, or if people craft that message in the right way, it can make a difference.
Can I just add one point to that? I agree completely with what Tom was saying. By the way, for those who don't know, whatever Tom says, always agree, because he really does know everything and is the best. But what's interesting about, and you're so right about the federal level, but what's interesting about the state level that we're seeing is that both California and New York have always relied on talent making the decision, and never sort of being a detractor from those programs. And generally, talent has probably, outside of creative, the most say in where something will shoot. But even in this particular moment in time, that's at times not enough. So you're seeing states like New York and states like California, who have never had to really compete at a state level, have to sort of figure out how to compete with the other states. So I think even now, every state is at risk of losing potential production if they don't have the components to draw production in. And I think California and New York are not excluded from that anymore.
One of the ways we use, because we advocate for protecting these incentives, is looking at the credits at the end of a movie. All of those people, those are all people that are being employed by these films, and really leading with that workforce. Because especially in the moment we're right now, workforce development is one of the angles. Also talking about culture, like he was saying, I lived in Asia for 20 years before I came back to the States, and saw how Korea did put so much energy into basically saying, for our country to jump up, we've got to put it into our cultural industries. And when it comes to the United States, the biggest export really is culture. That is why the U.S. has had leadership, is really because of its projected as storytelling. And I think that for us, we've got to understand the gravity of having leadership in storytelling is leadership in the world. Not having leadership in storytelling, someone else tells a narrative and you lose your position narrative. So I think that this is just a very important moment. And from the standpoint of also messaging wise, and I say the difference, if I were to be really simple, to find Europe versus the United States on how film finance goes, Europe is public and the United States is private. And in that sense, there's a merit argument in the population's mind in Europe, is that it's met a certain artistic level where that's not appreciated in the same level in the United States. And so I think it's very important, again, that we really be much more decisive on our narrative of how we pitch this industry to the population, because now, with it now being in the open discourse, we now really have to justify to our populations that this really is an industry. And I think that's the positive about the moment, is that with the tariff conversation, film is now an industry, and now we're going to defend our industry.
Thank you. Yeah, I also want to point out, I think for the New York incentive program, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're opening it up to above the line, and that's something that California doesn't have. So that, I think a lot of people are still looking at every fine point, so you have to make sure, Georgia, you guys have attracted a lot of productions because you qualify above the line, and that's a big factor. I also want to give a shout out to our media partners, Georgia Entertainment, Randy Davidson and his team. This is the state of Georgia, not the Georgia country, in case anyone's in the wrong panel. I get asked that a lot. But thank you, Randy and his team, for being our media partners. But Georgia's been a great state example where they've increased their incentives. They're probably one of the first states to increase their incentives to 30% above and below the line counts. And you guys are still very active, so that's a good model to follow. Tony, going back to you, in terms of having a new national film incentive program in the future, how do you think that would align with the other state programs, and what do you think the film incentive or film commission, future film commission, would do to kind of incorporate each of the states?
You're asking me to predict the future on what will happen with film incentives. I mean, I think that that's it's so hard to say what it will or won't be. I am by no means an expert in federal tax code and how it would be structured and why it would be structured a certain way and what the benefits would be. Again, I'll just fall back to my original talking point that it's just valuable that we're talking about it right now, and that's the important thing. Establishing, Jaha, like you were saying earlier, that federal film office, somebody who can be, the point of contact for film commissions across the U.S. or international productions or other countries who want to approach the U.S. Similar to the tourism arm, Brand USA. It can be that same kind of a thing. So I know that's not a very specific answer that you were looking for, but I don't want to make any broad statements that might get me in trouble later. So.
Okay, we could ask during happy hour.
There you go.
Val, going back to you, I know we talked earlier about how A24 really has compelling stories, and you guys don't just look at the financing model, but just one will really resonate with the story and the creative side. Can you give me some idea of how you guys decide on shooting on locations, if you guys have multiple states and countries to evaluate, and kind of what factors you look into?
Yes, and just to make this clear, we do look at the financial as well. It's a balance together that are dancing. So when it comes to location, it's very clear in the script that we have to go certain places. Usually we try to match that. In the recent years, I would say that we've made some production where they were set in the US and they took place elsewhere. And I want to get back to this federal film commission, and I think it would be interesting to see how they could align state, and I might be wishful thinking on my side, but maybe that could encourage some collaboration between states, just because it happens so often that my team is like, we want to film 5 days in this state, but production is taking place in this other state, and often my answer is no, we can't do it, and I wonder, is it better to have 30% or 0% of a production? And then you have new filmmakers that have never done anything in a state, and that would, they can dip their toe in a certain state that they never thought about filming, and then they make their next future project. They have had such a great experience that they want to do a full feature there. So I think if some collaboration between states would be possible, that would be something that we would probably benefit from.
And I think, as someone who's been on the film commission role for 10 years, it still is a possibility now. It just depends on what states you're working with, And sometimes you can factor in some regional incentives in some areas. I think there might be still a way for A24 to access that. I suppose if you have questions in the future, you can reach out to Katie and I at Film USA, and we can help maybe guide you through some of that and what states might make sense to be able to shoot a few days of one another and still access the tax credits in each one. I know you have your own wonderful, brilliant teams, but if anybody can be a resource, in the meantime, while we're waiting for national things to get their act together, we're happy to help any way we can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there'll be a line after this for Val, so you might want to hide. Yeah, and I want to mention, is there any U.S. film commissioners here? Let me see a raise of hands. For Film USA. We have some folks from Atlanta, from Savannah.
Unsung heroes of the industry.
Thank you for your service.
Baton Rouge. Yeah, I want to mention that I know during our last panel, some of the film commissioners mentioned they don't necessarily have incentives or very large incentive programs, but some of them are actually partnering together and kind of doing some collaboration to make it easier for filmmakers to shoot in their region. So, feel free to reach out to these film commissioners, regardless of whether or not they have an incentive program, because there could be other ways that they could help make your production relevant for their jurisdiction. Mike, just going back to you and kind of Shadowbox, when you first decided to go to Shadowbox, was it mainly, you not wanting to produce films, or is it just, what was your decision to kind of work for a company instead of producing?
Well, I came from Apple, so I was going from sort of this behemoth to another company that I spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not I wanted to leave what was a very comfortable position and a job that I loved with people that I loved, and I spent some time thinking about what I wanted to do and be when I grew up. And honestly, for me, what Shadowbox afforded me was the opportunity to build something at a time in the industry where there was just so much contraction happening. I saw it as an opportunity to build out a lot of ideas that the company was really excited about, to bring on a global team to help reshape and redefine what a studio operator could be. And having been given the opportunity and privilege to bring on people who understand production and production executive mindsets, who have worked with all of the majors, as well as understand how efficiencies within studio operations can work, was a really exciting challenge, and so far it's been the ride of my life. So I'm thrilled that I took the leap.
And the reason why I'm asking, I know right now there's been a lot of uncertainty and a lot of people out of work. I've heard from actors who are trying to be producers now, just trying to get any sort of income. So this is a good example of kind of doing something else within the industry. And same with Tony. I know you mentioned that you guys you decided to work with Talon Entertainment. How's that going for you?
It's good. It's good. I'm sorry I don't have a longer answer than that. It's a week into can for me here, so the brain is winding down slowly as we progress towards the final stages here. But we're good. We're producing a film in Jordan right now that'll shoot in Dallas. We have another film for Dallas later this year. Some other companies that I know we're circling with that I can't really say, but yeah, things are progressing well.
Okay. And then Tom, given your international experience and working with, distributors and different foreign markets, I see the trend of there being less people buying films from different countries, and that's really affecting the amount of films being made. Can you kind of give us some of your insight into that, and what do you think the trends are in the future in light of the current state?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think my phrase for the year is change is constant, and it's like every day things are changing rapidly in our industry, not just technology, but I think the landscape you see, like Ryan Coogler does a deal at Warner Brothers where he's getting rights back after 25 years. Like 5 years ago, everybody was focused on selling everything to the streamers, and now the streamers are not as interested in having rights in perpetuity on every film. They're willing to window. Things are just changing so much, and I love that. I mean, I thrive on it, and my clients who are nimble are able to not just adapt, but actually grab opportunity from it. And it was, I think, the Albert Einstein line, right? In the midst of adversity lies opportunity. And I think there is lots of adversity now, but I think that means that there are going to be many, many opportunities to fill gaps or create new places to generate revenue, to sell films. We're seeing jurisdictions step out and want to participate in our industry in a meaningful way that 10 or 20 years ago we're just focused on their local market. Japan's a great example. 3 Japanese films, I think, in the festival this year, a number of delegations out here, but they saw what happened in Korea and they want to replicate that to some extent in their own way. Amazing market there in Japan, tremendous talent, but never has been exported in the same way some of the other markets have exported their content. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity, notwithstanding the adversity. When I tell people, like, don't just focus on the negative, focus on where the opportunity lies. The one other thing I was going to mention is somebody else on the panel said that what we don't have at all in the U.S. is really any form of meaningful soft money, right? In fact, we're going the other direction. We're regressing. As you've probably seen, there was an executive order that removed funding from the Endowment for the Arts and PBS. I mean, we're going the wrong way, right? We need to support the arts for all the reasons we've talked about. And I think soft money has played such a critical role in Europe, UK, and even other parts of the world that I think, just don't exist in the US. And I think if we have a federal body that can advocate for that in a meaningful way, there are organizations like Creative Coalition, my friend Robin Bronk, who runs that. She's on the Hill monthly trying to get more money for the arts, but it's a real challenge, especially at the current environment. But I think soft money would be an important component of revitalizing at the independent level the creative industries in the U.S.
Great.
One thing on that note, like, we have a project that just got adapted by NPR and PBS, and the fact that it was a PBS adaptation, it now makes the argument to be a full feature adaptation, and that took that, so definitely a plug for PBS. But one other aspect, talking to a lot of European producers within Cannes this time, doing things like post-production, those are opportunities also for, that can be done in the U.S. as well. So I think the entire process of the film, not looking only at the beginning, but looking at the end as well. I mean, that's something that, for a while, Belgium was looking at really creating just a massive area just for the point of doing post-production. So I think, in terms of this, again, the entire ecosystem, really asserting some sort of leadership in that regard as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of great post-production companies in the U.S. So, kind of going back to what Tom was saying, also, a lot of things I've seen has to do with the way people are viewing content now, and kind of the content now. People are not watching at the movie theaters. That's resulting in less films being made. We're seeing more people going to their apps, or even, for me, even I don't really want to say this, but I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of like short films with where you have to pay those coins or whatnot. So I'm guilty of that. But what do you think the trends are in terms of these new technologies? How does that affect what you guys do in terms of your strategy for A24? Like these other distribution models, are you guys doing anything about that, or are you guys just focused mostly on film and TV?
I'm going to say yes to that. But of course, we're looking into different technology. There's nothing concrete for now that I can pinpoint, but there's conversations sometimes as well. But right now, we're focusing on film and TV. We have books. I don't know if anybody's been on our website. There's great merch. That's a big part of our process. When it comes to, I want to get back to the post and visual effects and all that I find sometimes that end up elsewhere when, ultimately would have been better for the project financially, creatively, to stay in the U.S. So some more flexibility with those state program, I think, will keep things in the U.S. A lot, at least on their end.
You guys have any comments on post? Anyone else here?
Well, for Louisiana, if you do 50% of your visual effects in state, that you get an extra 5%.
Great.
I think there's also some credits in Georgia for post-production. and obviously New York and some other key jurisdictions. But overall, I think the bottom line is it's just really expensive now to film and make movies in the U.S. So I'm hearing also from some of the major studios they might try to renegotiate some of these unions also to lower the costs. That's a large part of that, and kind of improve and make us more competitive. Aside from a federal incentive program, without key people in this GOP, I guess right now, we won't be able to have an incentive program. So I'm not sure how realistic that is. Maybe in the next year or two, that would be great if we had something. But kind of going with our final thoughts, if you had a chance to talk with key state senators or U.S. senators, and also the Secretary of Commerce, what would you tell them and kind of your pitch to them with getting a U.S. incentive program enacted and also other programs to help U.S. filmmakers? Let's start with Jaha.
Well, I'll say one, I would really say viewing this really with what it is, it's an industry. And you're supporting the workforce that comes with this. Also from the standpoint of, I'm a serious advocate for the South. I just wrote a book this year called Southern Horizons, and I talked about new stages in Texas, North Carolina. You're talking about filming in Georgia and Louisiana, and just about in the U.S. South itself, how all the opportunities that are in the film industry that one can invest in. So that's just something I would say. And I say this partly from the standpoint of politics. It's probably going to be Southern politicians that are going to push this through to get it to become a national film office. So you want to give them what they need to be able to justify to their constituents, understand this really is a job creator for their stations.
Mike?
Sort of echoing what has been said sort of all hour is, a federal incentive, these interstate treaties that sort of allow a lot of flexibility, sort of similar to what the EU does, and ways in which you don't have to reinvent the global wheel. And so much of what has worked and has created longevity and sustainability has existed in many other markets, and it's okay for us to take our cues from systems that have worked.
Tom?
So, it's not really hypothetical for me because I've been in touch with one of the delegations that had been meeting with the president, and my feedback was the only place in the world that I'm aware of that has 9 30-foot letters that spell out Hollywood is LA. So, do we want to keep those letters up or move them abroad? And I think the answer is to think global while focusing on the local, because our business, like every other industry frankly, but our business is a global business, and if we're trying to silo this industry off from the global market, I think we're just going to destroy it. I think we have to embrace a global mindset while focusing on growing it at the local level, and that, and of course avoiding the T word every time you talk with our commander-in-chief, but other than that, I think there's so much to figure out here, and the great thing about all of this, regardless of your political view or slant, is that we're having this conversation, right? Would we have been talking about a federal film office a year ago, or under different circumstances? Maybe not. We're having this conversation, so let's seize the opportunity and make it happen.
Great.
Yeah, along the same lines everyone else has said, we talk about jobs, but also to get the point across that it's blue-collar jobs. When you're talking about your grips and your gaffers and construction and everything else, these are not the actors, the directors, the above the line that are making all the money. These are the local people that are in unions, that are, hands-on blue-collar workers. That's who you're employing in this industry. And then beyond that, what, Katie likes to talk about a lot as well is, and you mentioned, the soft power. There's a reason English is spoken all over the world. There's a reason we can come to the south of France and everybody here speaks English when you go into restaurants and you talk to everyone here, and it's because of American films and our power as American filmmakers to get that out there in the world. And kids and people watching Baywatch in Germany, and they can speak English because they love David Hasselhoff and Pamela Anderson running down the beach, you know? So, you know, why else is English such a dominant power? And it's because of the storytelling power that we're putting out there into it. And to drive that home too, that it's, yes, it's jobs, but it's these other things that are huge benefits to, you know, what this industry brings as well.
Thank you. And last but not least, Val.
Yeah, I mean, in addition of what I've already mentioned and you reinforced, I think having a federal incentive and a film commission would help producers. Not everybody has access to a huge production tax and incentive team or a team to advise, and so I think supporting them and, you know, looking at the state and where would it be best for the project and helping them before it gets to studios would probably be helpful.
Okay, well, I want to thank all the panelists for joining us. Especially want to thank Film USA.
Thank you, Marco. Good job.
And then just, you know, we're going to have a happy hour after this, so feel free to join us. And, you know, if there's any film commissioners here from the U.S., please reach out to them and talk to them. They want to talk to you and want to promote filming in the U.S. So thank you again, Jaha, Mike, Tom, Tony, and Val.